Well, good evening, everybody. I really am honored to be here. General Ham, thanks, sir, for having me to talk here in the Rogers Forum. That's kind of loud.
Yeah, I got you now.
Can we turn that down just a little bit? Can't hear myself think. So I met General Ham first. I was defense attaché in Egypt, and he was AFRICOM commander, and he would come down there, and I was used to these generals coming in, SecDef coming in, CENTCOM commander, other commanders coming in, and they'd ride with their aircraft, and 40 people would traipse off the airplane with him. And so General Ham rolls in, and he's got his G5, and 4 other people get off the plane with him. I go, "Where's everybody?" And it's just low footprint, sir. And I tell you, that has stuck with me, and I try to keep that going. So it is great to be here. An airman in here, I didn't know. Normally, I was telling folks when I'm talking about the Army and I'm talking to other airmen, I can buffalo them, but not this crowd. I have to be careful here what I say tonight and tell you. So I do want to tell you that we are a total Army, we are a total Air Force. I'm going to start with just one small story of my. I spent 10 years in the active duty. 10 years straight out of pilot training at F-16s. Did a tour in the States, did a tour in Korea, did 4 years in Germany, and then I transitioned into the National Guard. Got hired by Delta Airlines. I'm probably the longest Delta Airlines pilot on military leave. My last Delta trip was in 2004. And they still have me on the books at Delta, so maybe one of these days I may. Yeah, and for all of you who may have lost bags and luggage and delayed, I just on behalf of Delta Airlines, I just want to say I'm sorry. Anyway, I transitioned into the National Guard. I was the weapons and tactics officer, the head instructor pilot in my fighter squadron in Germany. The Russians had just quit for the first time, so I show up in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm the weapons officer, which is the head IP, and I have this goal. I say I'm going to make this the best fighter squadron in the world. And just so you know, a weapons officer wouldn't be worth his salt if that wasn't his objective anywhere he went. And so I got there, and after about 6 months, even a little less than that, 4 months, I realized that I had in the squadron with me, I had 4 other full-time aviators. I had a bunch of aviators who were great Americans. They were doctors and bankers and farmers and business owners who were flying F-16s, who had flown the F-100 and had flown the F-4. And I realized that while these are great Americans, that I'm going to have to reset my goal on what kind of fighter squadron this is going to be. And I realized that maybe I was overshooting the mark to be the best fighter squadron in the world. And I was going to have to strive for competent contributors. Okay, that was my goal. I said, we're going to be safe. We're going to be able to deploy in a timely manner when they tell us to go. We're going to comply with Air Force regulations and instructions. We are going to be a respected contributor. We're not going to be the guys leading the pack. We're not going to be the guys out in front. We're going to be there, and we're going to fall in, and we're going to bring mass to this thing. That was 27 years ago. And since then, essentially, the United States Air Force has flown a combat sortie every single day. The United States Air Force has demanded that the Air National Guard raise its training standard, raise the professional standards of the airmen in the almost said formations. This Army crowd here we have formations in the Air Force, and we're going to take the same inspections. We're going to take train to the same level. We're going to have outside agencies come and inspect us. And over the course of time, and 27 years of being in conflict, I would tell you that it is a different organization than the one I left. Than the one I joined. Fighter squadrons now have much more full-time employees in them, more fighter pilots to do more work. They have a higher deployment operational tempo. They are more integrated into the active component. I know every senior leader in the Air Force because I grew up with them in my active duty career. I deployed with them. Dave Goldfein and I have known each other for decades, and there is a trust and a respect and an understanding that these units can go and they can deploy, and they will be, they could be now the best fighter squadron on the planet. It is a different Air National Guard than the one I got in. It was a good one, the one I got in, but the one I got in now is a better, more competent, more professional organization. I've watched in that same time frame now for the last 15 or 16 years, and I have to share with you that one of the greatest things about me becoming first the vice chief of the National Guard Bureau and now the chief is I got to learn about and watch the United States Army and how the United States Army National Guard plays a role as a combat component of the United States Army. Compo 2, I never heard that term before I got here. You know, I said Army National Guard, I know what that is now. And it has now been in war for 16, 17 years nonstop. It has taken on a disciplined training. Nothing will tweak your training regimen like going to combat for 15 or 16 consecutive years. General Cademy, those of you who know, he talks about Army 4.0. Army 4.0 is what he says is, hey, Army 1.0, that was the post-World War II National Guard, long hair, didn't comply with standards. Then Army 2.0 was to comply with standards, kind of work into be the strategic reserve and work towards compliance. Army 3.0 was the operational reserve that began in 9/11, multiple routine deployments all the time. Army 4.0 is where Tim Cademy and I believe General Mark Milley and I think the Army National Guard needs to go into the future. And it needs to be a piece of the operational force that is deployed continuously. As I speak to you today, 20,000 members of the Army National Guard are deployed in a Title X role somewhere around the world. Most of those in CENTCOM, the rest on, the folks just came off the South Pole, or I would have said every continent on the planet. But they're deployed around the world doing every single mission. The Army National Guard, I think most of you know, is doing things and missions with our division headquarters who are deployed right now in Kuwait and Afghanistan. That's about the third spin for having Army National Guard division headquarters deployed around the world. When I look at the patch chart that I see where our Army National Guard is going to 4 combat training center rotations this year instead of 2, and we are changing the operational deployment tempo, the training tempo of the Army National Guard. And it is going to be challenging for us. I always worry about can we deploy and sustain what our business model is. You know, my 3 priorities as the Chief of the National Guard Bureau are lethal forces, ready forces for the President and the governors. That's a big part of who we are and what we do. The second one is allies and partners for the SecDef, but for me it's people, it's employers and families, because if our employers can't support the tempo of our soldiers as they train, and our business model begins to crunch, then I'm not doing the Army any favors if I can't retain, recruit, deploy, dwell, train, recruit, deploy, dwell, and we've got to maintain that continuous cycle that we're doing. So I think that's important. What we're doing now in Army 4.0 and this new Army National Guard that we have is, it's 39 days is not necessarily all we expect from our soldiers anymore. And I saw this in the Air National Guard, and when just being totally honest with you, I sat down last week with the chairman of ESGR, General Craig McKinley, retired, and I asked him, I said, what are you seeing out here from employers, and are you seeing employer fatigue? And he told me, no. And when I talk to tags and up here, most of them will tell me, generally speaking, no. We're not seeing. That doesn't mean we don't have some stressed pieces of our community, but all in all, that 20,000 number that I told you that's deployed now, as I see it, and I look at our contributions to the National Defense Strategy, is I think that for us to help the active component retain their readiness, for us to stay integrated with the active component, that I see it as my job and General Cademy's job to make available to General McKinley and to the combatant commanders as much reserve component force structure as we can deploy. And so where it used to be kind of the thought process was we're going We're going to go get the reserves when we don't have enough. Well, now the mindset needs to think about, let's go get the reserves where we can and posture them against all known training activities that we have. Anything that you can see coming, within reason, anything that you can see coming that can be predictable, that can be that we can maintain with our employers and our families, that predictable. We have to give them time to live their civilian lives. I mean, they are citizen soldiers, and we can't expect them to be gone all the time. So some of the higher ops tempos, some of the heavy brigades, the field artillery brigades, some of the striker brigades, those things, we don't have enough of them, they're going to spin faster. But even on a 1-to-4 dwell-to-deploy ratio. And that's a lot. And I think many of you would know that for a guardsman, we think, well, you're taking 60 days off. Most people start to train. Most people pack that on top of their civilian career. They have to go work extra to make up for the time they lost at their civilian career. So there gets to be a point in there at some point where if you're gonna spin this thing, you're gonna have to work hard. So I asked this guy right here, General Joe Girard, is the Adjutant General of Georgia. That's right. And he is another thing that's building readiness is the Army Associate Unit Pilot Program. And so you've got the 48th ICBT in Georgia that is paired up with the 3rd ID. And because of that, our soldiers are getting better training. They're getting better range time. They're getting our leaders are getting better experience. There is more integration with the active component. They're going to go to JRTC coming up here another month and deploy together overseas to Afghanistan here next year. And I think that the trust that builds, you can't just show up and fight a war with somebody you don't know. You got to know who they are, what they're doing, what they stand for, what they bring to the fight. You can respect them, but you can't trust them until you've actually trained with them and worked with them and flown with them and deployed with them. And that's what we're getting with the Army, the unit pilot program. Georgia's not, I don't know that every case is as good as Georgia. Everything is right there, the 3rd ID, the whole brigade right there in the state. It was made to do something like this, but there are other places and places we can go to do more of that, not less in the future. So I think that's an important part. Lots of things to build readiness. So how do I assess the readiness in the Army National Guard? When people ask me, are you happy with the readiness in the Army National Guard? I have to say, all in all, mainly, it's hard for me to be disappointed where we are in the reserve component. I mean, we're doing exactly what we're funded to do. And, we have the ability now the Army 4th generation cycle, even though I know we use a different model than that now, it did amazing things for us. I think it put us on this cycle of predictability. It gave us an overall structure of disciplined training readiness. And it doesn't all cost money. I mean, it is the cycle of knowing when you're going to train and training on a timeline and deploying and doing things that have made us a better Army National Guard. The idea now, the sustained readiness model, is those heavy brigades, they're going to do 39 days one year. They're going to do 48 next year. They're going to do 60 days in that 3rd year. And then to sustain that readiness, we're going to do 51 days the following year. That's a lot of training days. That is a lot. And so to be fair, we are in cycle 1 of this, going through this right now, really, since we started the sustained readiness model. And so the trick to see for us is, how are we going to be able to do this in cycle 2 and 3 and beyond? Is this sustainable? We tend to think it is. But I predict that there will be some changes. Some of the people in these organizations, their civilian lives won't be able to tolerate it. They're going to have to cross-train. They're going to have to do something else. Some of these people will be able to adapt, and they'll do it. And as we recruit new people into the bottom of this organization, they won't know any different, and it will be the new way that the Army National Guard works and that these formations are doing business. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future. And I saw that exact thing happen in the Air National Guard side. Is an organization that occasionally would deploy for training pre-1991 to throughout the 90s, Northern Watch, Southern Watch, continuous deployments. And then there became this expectation that if you get in, you're going to have to continuously deploy. And some people said, nope, can't do it, and they left. Some people said, nope, can't do it. They got into a non-flying organization or a non-flying MOS, AFSC, and then everybody who got in now knew this is the deal, this is what you're going into, this is the commitment. And I really feel like that has turned both the Air National Guard and the Army National Guard into something that can contribute at every level across this national defense strategy. Hit one more slide here. So, this is my only slide. So, I used to have these kind of distinct lines between the warfight mission and the homeland mission and the partnership mission. And what I'll tell you is, this warfight piece, that's why the Department of Defense gives us $27 billion. We get $17 billion from the Army to make 343,000 Army National Guard troops ready to go to war with the United States Army on a predictable basis. And I get about $10 billion on the Air Force. And for that, we get an immense amount of combat capability, capacity at a cost. And so as we use this in this operational sense, I make the assertion that it is in the government's best interest to use this operational National Guard to the maximum extent possible. Why is that? Because every time you can use this force to accomplish some mission that you don't have to use the active component for, the active component for can be ready, can be on tap to go to unknown contingencies, and can be there to go to things that we, as a reserve component, aren't that good. Reacting to things is not our strong suit. We can do it. President can mob us all tomorrow and send us Korea. But I think that overall, for the sustained, non-continuous combat role, I think that's it. And notice that there aren't distinct lines in here. If you were to talk about the national defense strategy, you would say to yourself, the biggest acknowledgement in that whole strategy is that it is a competition continuously across the spectrum, from well below combat through full spectrum combat operations. And we have to be able to play, and in fact, we do play in non-combat competition roles every single day with the Department of Defense and with our National Guard. And so I think that's an important piece. For us, when we're not doing this, we're doing that. The homeland piece, and I shamelessly tell you it's an important part of what we do. The thing that makes us different, the president can mobilize us, the governor can mobilize us, and when we had 80,000 people in Iraq in 2005, not 20,000 like today, but 80,000, we had 50,000 that had to go help in Katrina. Yeah, you remember that. That's a big one. And then, so just 6 months ago now, with Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria, we had 20,000 gone, and we had 45,000 coming on duty in Texas, coming on duty in Florida, coming on duty and I'm very careful to make sure that when bad things happen in our country, every component, every service pitches into the fight and does it. But these adjutants generals here, they think about it every day. They think about it at every meeting with their governors as people that provide that forces to make their forces safe. So big part of what we do. So last year, 1.8 million man days of duty in the homeland, and that was wildfires to snowstorms to floods to hurricanes, and so having that at the ready while we are on dwell from that warfight mission is a good thing. My favorite deployment during the hurricane was right smack in the middle of Hurricane Harvey. Texas is getting crushed, and Texas mobilized 1,000 soldiers and sent them to Fort Bliss to go to the Sinai. Right in the middle of that deployment, we didn't miss a single Title X deployment in the entire thing. So the homeland piece is a huge part of what we do. Competition across the spectrum, our partnerships. I saw an officer from Latvia back here. I know that the Michigan National Guard and Latvia are brothers. We have partners with 79 nations. 25 years the state partnership program has been in play. Last year alone, 1,000 events between our partner nations and the United States Army National Guard and Air National Guard in the States. 15 of those countries have deployed to combat with, embedded with our Army National Guard formations. It's been a completely huge success story. I was in Europe right after I started doing this full-time gig again here, and I recall that somebody was talking to the Army National Guard about, why are you continuing these partnerships with Eastern Europe and the Baltics? Why are you continuing to do this? These countries are joining NATO. They are members of the European Union. And H. Stephen Blum, who was the Chief of National Guard at the time, said, let me just tell you that you have not yet begun to see the benefits of these relationships from these programs. And so that the assurance and the partnerships from these relationships who really, really know each other, we train together, and we train in everything from humanitarian assistance and disaster relief through full spectrum combat operations, deploy together, unfortunately have died together in combat. It is a huge part of what we do. But the partnerships don't stop there. It's partnerships with, it's interagency partnerships. And again, as part of the National Defense Strategy on how we embed and work with, that National Defense Strategy is a defense strategy, but it counts on a whole of government approach across our government. And so our ability to partnership with the interagencies and with these partner nations, I think, has been a huge opportunity for us and something that we're very good at. I think, looking at this individual in the middle, 381 years, we've been around doing this stuff for a long time. And as I look out into the future and if we're going to stay in operational force, the only way I think that we're going to be able to be ready faster is the Air Guard is a faster model. We have 35% full-time force inside the Air National Guard. And so if you look at the Army National Guard, 16.7% of that force is full-time. And so I make the argument, Secretary Esper, to General Milley, to Mike Murray, to Cape, everybody up there that will listen to me, is if you want us to be able to deploy faster, mobilize in a shorter amount of time, my advice is the only way you're going to be able to do that is to increase the percentage of full-time support inside the Army National Guard. We're going to be able to maintain the stuff, our equipment better. We're going to be able to, get more training done. The only reason you have full-time people in the National Guard is to train the part-time force and to make sure that when they come into our training periods that we have things that they can train with, ranges that are set up, weapons, munitions, everything that works. And without the full-time force there to do it, we're not going to be able to maintain that. So that's what I think is, if we stay at 343,000 as a number for end strength, and even in this last budget, when we got 8,000 people put back in, we didn't add end strength. We added that force to the TTHS account, if you will. We made our current formations more ready, and that's so that we can be ready to deploy when the United States Army needs us to do it. So I think I'm going to stop right there. That's about 25 minutes of talking, and see if anybody would like to ask me any questions about us. I think that, from a readiness perspective, for the warfight mission, we're in a good place. We got the challenges coming up in front of us in terms of maintaining our ability to sustain the current operational tempo. I think that that there is I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but I think there is 20,000 gone. I think we can deploy slightly more than that, which would be a good thing for the active component and allow them to sustain their readiness. And I think that's about it. Questions for me? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Two questions directly. One, the recent news that in the budget request, the Air Force is not planning on directly replacing the EHC Joint Stars aircraft currently serving with the Georgian Air National Guard. What do you think about that? And secondly, What do you think about the upgrades to C-130H aircraft that have been in Wyoming and New York Air National Guard service? And would you like to see this happen to the rest of the C-130Hs in the Air National Guard?
Those are pretty Air Force questions to be asking me in this crowd. But I'll tell you what I think. I think that the Air Force, if there's one thing about this national defense strategy that I believe to be true, is it is committed to the modernization and recapitalization of our force. I mean that without modernizing our force, new technology, advances in science and technology, and bringing that into our force, we cannot maintain the military advantage we need over the principal threats to the United States Air Force and the United States Army. So I think that the Air Force is committed to finding the mission of JSTARS. What is it that requirement actually is? And is there a better, more efficient way using new technology to continue that mission? And if that's the way it's going to go, I know the Adjutant General of Georgia has heard that same picture, that same spiel, but we cannot afford to continue to invest in older platforms that are not survivable in various scenarios, given a China or a Russia scenario, and we need to look beyond that. With respect to the C-130, the Air Force has a defined level, as I currently see the numbers in the budget, that buys a certain number of C-130Js. We have in the Air National Guard about 135 C-130Hs. And there are some modifications that are funded already inside the program to modify those aircraft, and one, make them compliant to fly in the national airspace. That's a good thing. And two, upgrade potentially the engines and the propulsion systems. And so those options are out there, though they're not yet funded. So I'm going to discuss that, leave that with the Air Force, and we'll see where that goes. But I think it is longer term. It is a less expensive option to upgrade those engines, upgrade those propeller and propulsion systems, rather than buy all new C-130Js. It's just more expensive. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sir, Bill Crowder.
Yes, sir.
One of the challenges always is how you get the active component and the guard component to really understand one another, which gets Title 10 and Title 32. So how are we doing in being sure that both sides of the equation understand one another and understand the limits that those two titles bring to the fray and work their way through them?
Sure, that's a great question. But I'll tell you, it is driven by leadership. Leadership has to make that happen. And the fact that we've got these associate unit pilot programs underway with Title 10 and Title 32 forces working and training together pre-deployment, I think goes a very long way towards helping understand. And it's not just the active component understanding the Guard or the reserves. It's we have to understand the requirements of both of these things. And I would tell you that leadership, starting with the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army, have committed outwardly and directly to making sure that the leaders across all levels of the active component understand the Army National Guard. The fact that some of these gentlemen sitting in the front row are members of the Army National Guard are here going through an active component led 2-star leadership development program where they can communicate to each other, talk to each other, understand the limitations. There are some, we used to talk about the Guard and the reserve component as if the part-time nature of the force was a weakness. And if you know how to do it, the part-time nature of that force is a strength. They bring extra skill sets. They're competent in what they do. I used to tell the story, the North Carolina Army National Guard won the Sullivan Cup 2 years ago. And they blend. So inside that tank was a truck driver, a police officer, a school teacher, and the commander of the tank was an insurance adjuster. He can blow up your house and swing by and settle the claim. Where do you get those kind of blended skill sets? And I think that everywhere I go, they're anecdotal mostly. Where a commander will say, "Hey, I had this sergeant major who ran a water utility company back home, and I was in Iraq, and he came in and he fixed the whole thing, and now we have water in this town." There are more and more stories like that, leveraging the forces. So that, to me, what you just asked, that question, it is the single most important benefit of integration and operational use of the reserve component. When you use people, when you actually continuously deploy with them and train with them, you learn about them, you understand about them. And then when the active component, I have found this over 27 years, when the active component can actually deploy you and use you on a mission set, then they are willing to invest in you. They will invest in your training. They will invest in the professional development of your leaders. They will buy you new equipment. And something I didn't say in my speech earlier tonight was, in my remarks, is one of the most important things that we have to admit is that as you modernize the force, you must modernize the force concurrently. You can't modernize all of the active component and then modernize the reserve component. It doesn't work that way anymore. If you can't deploy and plug in with the C2 mechanisms, the command and control, the network mechanisms of what you're deploying with, then you're not a relevant force. If you have an old version of an aircraft that's not logistically supportable in theater and you won't deploy it, you are no longer relevant to the force. So it is my strong belief that continued operational use fixes the problems of understanding the differences and nuances amongst the components. And doing that regularly, and commitment to concurrent and balanced recapitalization of the force. Not because it's a nice thing to do. It is a mission-effective thing to do. And that's the reason you have to do it. So great question. Thanks for letting me get that out there. I forgot to get it out in my remarks. What else?
Yes, sir.
Yes, in the back.
Yes, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Pekovich. I actually work for Army National Guard G3FM.
Okay.
I'm an active duty soldier assigned to support you, but I have over 15 years in the Guard myself. One of the things that caused a problem when we were talking about civilian employers was that once I exceeded my 21 days of allotted training time by federal law, my civilian employer actually gave me a reprimand for actually going to drill because I have exceeded that 21 days. And I was just wondering if there's any move underfoot to get the law changed, because if you're looking at the sustained readiness model where we're increasing the op tempo.
So I haven't heard of a 21-day violation. I have heard of somebody exceeding their 5-year USERA limitation. Now you look at me and you go, how did you do it for 15 years? Most of my time was USERA exempt time. As Title 10 deployed, those kinds of forces was USERA exempt. So, the idea is for us and ESDR and my organization and the Hill and Naugus. Is Roy Robinson, did he ever sneak in here? He didn't make it. I would like to get more details on that and find out. I've never heard of a 21-day, callback on somebody else. I've heard of people that said, hey, you've used up your 5 years. Sorry, you can't do that anymore. I'll even go to bat for you there. But, let me get the details on that. I'll do it. Yes, sir. And ma'am, in the back.
Yes, hello, sir. Thank you for being here. My name is Patty Barron. I'm the Director of Family Readiness for AUSA. And so I have a family-focused question for you.
Okay.
As you're talking about integration of the reserve component into the active component, one of the things that I've always thought were some of the strengths of our reserve component families is their connection to the local community. They really know how to find resources in the local community. And I know that when you all get activated, whether it's for homeland support or the warfighting support, you look to the DOD and you look to the Army, active Army, for support. But I always thought it would be amazing to have the reserve component teach the active component how to reach out to their local communities. Is there any talk around doing that type of resilience building among both components?
I'm going to ask one of these tags in the front. Are you doing anything like that, Joe?
Not working with the active component. We are not. And it's probably a good idea, but we haven't been asked, or we haven't asked them to work together either. So, might be something.
I have found that, there's different support networks for people who are active and deployed. And I'll give you one example. My son, he's an F-16 active duty Air Force pilot. He is actually based in Burlington, Vermont, and he's flying with the Burlington National Guard as a total force airman. We do that kind of thing in the Air Force. I had nothing to do with that assignment, by the way. And so he's deployed, and the wife's got 3 little kids and snowing and all that stuff. I said, so, hey, so do you have this support network? How's the family programs taking care of you up there? Is everything good? And she says, well, you know, it's funny, but because she's active duty, and she came from an active duty base, and they're used to all of the families and the spouse networks and the family networks and the programs at all the wing commanders, that they have all of that. And she said, well, we don't have any of that here, because these people are all here in the town of Burlington, and their families live here. Their mothers, their grandparents, all of that network is in place for these people to take care of the deployed soldiers and airmen. So, you know, there are different support networks, but I think you're right. The people from hometown America in these places do know how to access their folks and listen, but it's just another nuance of how we have different needs and requirements as different components. Thanks for the question. Sergeant Major.
Yes, sir. Reference your last comment on the modernization. How is the National Guard going to tie into the Futures Command that the Army's doing? And then second point of that question is, if that is the fact going to tie into it, how is the national and the state level National Guard going to combine that and actually perform that action?
So the question to the first one is, I don't know how we're going to tie into it, but I know we need to tie into it. We're tied into every other command in the Army, and we need to be, you know, part of that. And so, you know, I think that, you know, as the Army establishes Future Command and begins part of it, that they wouldn't want to do it without bringing the reserve component in there and doing. What was the second part of your question? The states?
The state national departments, they act differently. How is the national and the state National Guard going to act differently when it comes to modernization and purchasing equipment? How are they going to tie into that? Because the state does it differently.
The state does it differently?
When you look at purchasing equipment and procuring equipment.
So the Army procures all our equipment. You know, that's the way. That's the reason we can be a good deal for the. That's why I don't like talking about how much we cost and money and all the rest of that stuff, because it's hard to compare apples and oranges. You know, it's. I have a little buzz line about never trust a number you have not manipulated yourself. You know, I can prove anything I want in terms of I cost a lot or I cost a little, but. You know, I think that it's important that, you know, you take at face value that whatever missions the Army has in general, they're going to want the reserve component to be a piece of it. And as they modernize and recapitalize, they're going to want to be a piece of it. And, you know, so we'll engage on them. I know I kind of dodged your question on that a little bit, mostly because I just don't know, you know, beyond how we're going to plug in. Yeah.
Never trust a number you have not manipulated yourself. I'm going to
Ask
remember
Bob
that
Lennox.
one.
Ask Bob Lennox about that. He knows. He comes from the money manipulators back there. That's right.
Hey, sir, thanks again for being here tonight. Really makes a difference. And even though you got Joe and John and Al here to be supporting fires for you, that's great. Sir, a longer-term question that the total force faces. And it has to do with, in order to sustain the readiness of our nation, requires us to be able to recruit and retain. Right now, we have 71% of the nation's youth that is not eligible for military service, even if they wanted to join, for a combination of 3 primary reasons: moral turpitude, or bad paper, education, and physical readiness, physical fitness. So the question is for you, again, across the total force, how do we work that to our guardsmen, but even our reserve component teammates, even in the active, are struggling with this long term? And since I have not manipulated a number or percentage myself, but I would submit either, Joe or John there in Pennsylvania, even Al in North Dakota, they have challenges with recruiting and retaining the team that we need to sustain all of those things that you highlighted, both for our Title 32 responsibilities to the governors and also our mobilization requirements for our nation. And I'd be interested in your comments and your challenges, sir.
So, I think you know that every service, every senior leader is worried about that. I think this will be the 5th year in a row that we have failed to meet our recruiting mission inside the Army National Guard. We've maintained end strength because we've been able to retain, but as we all know, that ages the force. General McConville was just at our group of adjutants generals who met, and he gave a kind of a speech on the recruiting issue and the problems that everybody's having. He's boiled down the recruitable population to about 350,000 youth across the nation that we can find if we can find them and get them and convince them. And how do we do this without being the self-supplier of families, which is not necessarily good for America. My dad served, I served, my brother's a 2-star in the Air Force, he's got 2 sons in, I've got a son in. We are all continuously feeding the fight with our own flesh and blood because, one, it means something to us, and, generally we meet the standards that we do it, but I don't know what the answer is. And we spent a lot of time thinking about we nitnoy the recruiting mechanisms of how do we get these kids in high school, and there is competition. I mean, between Compo 1 and Compo 2 and Compo 3 and Air Force and Marine Corps and Navy, and how do we get them all to do it? So I think it's a challenge that we have to work through together. We have to start earlier. We have to maintain the broadest possible diversity of the people we're looking for. We have to go find everybody we can get to maintain them as part of our force. I'd like to say that one of the programs highlighted by the partnerships is our Youth Challenge program that we have in the Army National Guard, in the National Guard, where we 140,000 graduates of kids that wouldn't have otherwise been players. We don't get many of those into the Guard, but they're in this, at least in the system. Some of them we can't get in the Guard because of bad things they did to get into the programs that they're in. So I don't know if you got an answer. I'm sure General Milley, General Goldstein, I would love to figure out how to do it, but we've got a real issue with, we're about 8,000 under right now on the Army National Guard in terms of recruited soldiers, and we're going to retain people. We're going to put the brakes on. We're going to make sure that we can say we got 343,500 at the end of the year, but that doesn't help the fact that we can't find enough people who are willing and want to serve, who are qualified to serve, and you can only dial down the qualifications so low before you start to hurt the force. And I think that at some point you say we got to take this, and that's what we get. And that's hard to do as the Army grows, as the Air Force is growing. As we're trying to make the force capable to do all the things the nation needs to do, it gets harder and harder to do it. So that's a great question. I wish I could tell you how we're going to do it. We got smart people working in recruiting. I have this thing that works for me called the National Guard Innovation Team. And they've said they look at problems and how you attract the millennials and how you attract the new generation. Millennials are old guys now. You're looking at the younger ones, trying to get the people to join. So there's no real easy answers. Yes, sir.
Some folks in the room may not know how extensive the Guard's role is in cyber today. Could you talk about how you're synchronizing, or maybe the Adjutant General can, between the state mission for the Guard in cyber and the federal mission?
Yes, sir. I'll talk about it from my perspective and then toss it to these gentlemen here to see if they have some add from me. But so in general, the cyber enterprise is still slightly growing, and across all of the National Guard, Air and Army, we'll have about 6,000 people who are in it. And it's in every state, territory, and the District of Columbia. Every state has at least something we call a defensive cyber operations element. It's a very small numbers of force structure that they have been allocated to, and they've basically taken it out of HIDE from, it's not MTOE structure. They've taken it out of HIDE to build this, to give the state a cyber capability. And some states have been very aggressive in using that. Some states have used that to buy commercial off-the-shelf software and check their state.gov networks for security, even pre-elections, to make sure that they were, and some of them did find some malware and some other security implications on it. Broadly speaking, the rest of the cyber enterprise is all built and designed to support the Title X operations of our services. We have about 12 cyber protection teams in the Army National Guard, and we're going to have about 15 cyber operations squadrons in the Air National Guard. The Air Force always has 2 of those cyber operations squadrons on mission doing Title 10 mission. And so with 15 of them, we can have 2 on duty and then 2 off and 2 more. It works at a 1-to-5 dwell ratio that we can maintain that. On the Army National Guard side, the 11 or 12 CPTs that they have, we only have 1 currently on Title 10 mission for the Army. The rest of those, while they're still currently getting training, are currently not funded as part of the cyber mission force for the Army. But they are getting training squadron and sources, and the Army is looking to bring them on. They just haven't done it yet. So all of those, while training and organizing to do the Title 10 warfight mission, are available to be used in a state active duty status if they're not employed in a Title 10 role. Using the cyber domain is very tricky from a liability standpoint, from an authority standpoint. How are you assuring that whatever you're doing on that network is in your state? Because it goes every place else and different liabilities and laws, and it's very confusing. But the TAG of Georgia is building a SCIF inside the University of Georgia in Augusta. And there is a cyber center of excellence there. So we are going to put his SCIF in that facility, funded by the state of Georgia. It's a great innovative approach, such that we can, 1, hopefully recruit some cyber professionals who are going to this cyber center of excellence at Augusta. Is it Augusta State? Augusta University. And so I see that as an innovative way to, 1, get access to talent. And I know Fort Gordon's kind of working on his way of sneaking himself in there too, man. So that's it. But it is a growing enterprise. And as I watch this stuff, cyber's growing, space is growing. I'm really interested in what I can do and what the Army Guard can do in space. I mean, there's General Milley's going to need space in this new, smaller, lighter, mobile force that's out and around. You're not going to do anything if you're not connected to the satellites. So how we adapt to that is going to be a key to our future. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Just one question. Given the track record of the International Partnership Program with the Army National Guard, has there been any consideration of expanding it to the Air National Guard?
Well, no, it's a state program, so both Air and Army. He's got a partnership with Argentina, and they do air stuff and they do Army stuff. And so we have right now we're looking for partners for 3 more countries: Brazil, Qatar, Burkina Faso. Those are 3 additional countries that we're going out there. So that will take us over 80 partnerships. The program is expanding, and I've got to kind of watch it so that we make sure that the right amount of dollars are there so that the program can do what it's designed to do. But all in all, I think it's a very successful joint program managed in the state for the combatant commanders. The countries, the way it works is that they're nominated by the combatant commander. Once the ambassador in the country says, this country qualifies for a partnership, and the combatant commander will get it approved through OSD. OSD says, yep, we agree that this country is ready for a partnership, and OSD will come to me and say, we'd like you to find a partner for this particular country. So I then go back to the combatant commander and say, what are the attributes you would like in this partner? They need to have this kind of capacity, air, Army, what are this? And then we put it out to the 54, and they bid on it. They say, hey, if you let me be a partner, these are all the things I can do in these lines of effort to make this a great partnership. And it's been hugely successful. I saw one more back in the back. Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. Colonel Paul Bates from the British Army.
Yes.
This afternoon I was down at CSIS listening to the 3 secretaries of the services talking. What struck me, they were talking about readiness, but each of them was talking about their own individual service readiness and not about joint readiness. And I wondered, well, if the Army was ready and the Air Force and the Navy weren't, what would that mean? And particularly Secretary Wilson was talking about how she had a 50-person team looking at readiness, and I wondered how much of the National Guard are part of that 50-person team, for one, and then how you categorize readiness yourself, particularly parochially from an Army perspective, whether you view readiness in a holistic 1 million person total Army, or whether you look first at your National Guard, how that works with the reserve, how you're working with the active component when you're measuring readiness.
Sure. So, I mean, that's a good, fair question. I mean, when you say, readiness and how do you measure it, are you talking personnel and supply and training and equipment, straight across the line of the things that we measure to determine, hey, do we have the right people and are they trained? And how is our equipment and does it work? And, all of the things that you have the right equipment to go do your job, all of those things that you can add up and do and train. And then, so I think broadly speaking is if you can do the things that's on your whatever your unit is tasked to do, if you're trained to do them, you have the equipment, you have people, your readiness is going to be good. I would tell you that joint readiness is, we all of the Joint Chiefs talk about maintaining joint readiness, the joint battle space. There's a realization that you can't go anywhere and fight any war. That doesn't involve not only all the services, but coalition partners and the like in terms of how we do that. We obviously can't control readiness of joint coalition partners, but we while it is the service's responsibility to organize, train, and equip their forces, that's what they do. That's the Title 10 responsibilities of a service chief. And then, from the joint hat, they come together as joint chiefs and make sure that we can work and fight and do everything together jointly. So how you exactly measure that, I'm not sure. I'm surprised that you saw three. Did you see three separate things? I mean, the Air Force has problems because they don't have enough time, to make people ready. It's just they're already deployed and they don't have enough fire squadrons, so they can't come back, even if they had money, and train because they're busy. They're too busy. That's the Air Force's biggest problem. So, I know that's an answer. It's a complicated business, but I think that there's a lot of effort put into maintaining the joint fight and the joint force towards readiness.
Sir, I'd like to come back to you on
Yes,
the cyber piece. You talked about you had elements that were in cyber, both in the Air Guard and the Army Guard. Great. And worried about state boundaries, which makes me start thinking about crossing over into Title 50 and crossing over to enforcement at the state level. How are you balancing that out so at the end of the day that guardsman or guardswoman that's out there in wherever they are doesn't suddenly find themselves caught between those conflicting laws that you have to deal with all the time?
That's how they limit what it is we can do on anything that's not a DoD network, and so while DoD is we can do things as Title 32 guardsmen on a DoD network, but when you go to help other parts of your government, other parts of your state who have had not a hurricane but a cybercane, they've been whacked and somebody has done something to your network where you want some help, we can coordinate, train, advise, and assist. We can, as guardsmen, show up kind of over the shoulder. We can't touch any keyboards, but we might be able to give them, we might be able to touch base with other parts of our military who might be able to help fix whatever problem that is.
So you're beginning to bring DHS into
DHS, the DHS owns the response. As you know, DHS for infrastructure attacks, cyber, it's not a DoD responsibility. It belongs to DHS. Should have said that up front. That's right.
Okay, we'll make this the last one.
Last question.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Piper with Army National Guard G2. So my question is, with the current policy that has come out with SecDef about the non-deployable soldiers having to be discharged from our force, how do you see that impacting our readiness and our ability in the future with us trying to meet our 343.5?
Right. So, I think that, SecDef guidance is going to be pretty clear. Let's figure out who are broke and who are hard broke, for us. Who's not ready because they have dental or other medical fixable items that are not something that we can repair on a term. I think my Command Sergeant Major Kepner brought up to me the fact that he's concerned about the readiness of the reserve component and not having the same access to military health care that can fix it. Where somebody who might be an active component person can just make sure that they all have insurance coverage, and not all of the forces in the reserve components don't. So I think that if you are a non-deployable and a non-deployable for more than 12 months and there's not an estimated time where you're going to get deployable, I think that there will be a time when you no longer can serve in our Army National Guard. And I think it'll have an impact on the force. But if you can't deploy and you can't go to war and you can't do those kinds of things, and I know the adjutants generals, I heard them loud and clear. There are some adjutants generals who are very concerned about what that number might end up being. When you're talking about the Department of Defense, you're talking about a number like 200,000 people that are currently non-deployable. That's a lot of people. And when you're looking at the Army National Guard, you probably know the number, and I've seen it, but it's not coming to my nugget right now for some reason. I think it's about 10,000, inside our formations. The ones that are non-deployable for more than 12 months are much less than that. But I think that the SecDef's kind of made it very clear that you're going to have to be deployable if you're going to be able to stay in the Army National Guard. Hey, it really has. It's been an honor for me to speak to you guys tonight. I've enjoyed it very much. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for letting me come tell you a little bit about the National Guard. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thank you.